Hi, welcome to our home bar, and welcome to our YouTube channel, Wise Whiskey. I'm Tony, and on today's video, we're going to go over whiskey styles. We're going to go into some of the legal and marketing terms that you might find in each style, and kind of help give you a guidepost within those styles. I like to start, when I do my whiskey kind of spectrum of whiskey styles, I start with North America, then I go international, and I typically start with whiskeys that I think are like on the lighter, sweeter side and kind of work up. So we're going to start with Canadian whiskey. And I've got two examples here. When most people think of Canadian whiskey, they're going to think of Crown Royal, Canadian Club, Rich and Rare Reserve, 40 Creek, Canadian blended whiskeys. Now we'll get into American blended whiskey in a minute, but it is important to know there's a couple differences about Canadian blended whiskey. Canadian whiskey is distilled single grain, meaning they'll make 100% rye whiskey, 100% corn whiskey, a barley whiskey, whatever grain they're using. They make the whiskeys out of the single grains, then they'll blend them together to get a mash bill. In American distilling, you're going to take the grains typically and mix that grain ratio into one mash bill and make one whiskey that you age. You're not going to make a corn whiskey, a rye whiskey, and a malted barley whiskey and then mix that together to make a bourbon mash bill. Canadian whiskeys, they do that. They blend them after they've distilled them as separate grain whiskeys. Also with American whiskeys, you have to age them for a minimum of 2 years. In Canadian whiskey, you have to age them in oak for a minimum of 3 years. There are also allowances for certain amounts of flavoring, color, and other things to be added to the whiskey by Canadian law. Now, in Canada, a lot of folks will call all whiskeys ryes. They just refer to everything as rye. Most of what we drink here from Canada is not super rye forward. It's definitely on the sweeter side. But in addition to the 40 Creek here, I have a J.P. Wiser's 18-year-old. Now, this is also a blended Canadian whiskey. But again, minimum of 18 years. Whenever we see an age statement, we know that that's the youngest whiskey in there. So it's possible there are things older, but every whiskey blended together here is 18 years old. It doesn't tell us the mash bill, so we're not sure if this is rye whiskey, corn whiskey, what all is blended together. It does tell us that it's 80 proof. So Canadian whiskey does tend to be lower alcohol. There are a few brands that will do some higher proof releases, but for the most part, when you're buying Canadian whiskey, you are going to find it at 80 proof or 40%. Definitely lower than when you start getting, like if you were to find an 18-year-old bourbon, those are typically going to be much higher proof. Elijah Craig 18 is a rare example. That one is still 90 proof, so higher than this. Other than your bottom shelf kind of entry-level bourbons, your well bourbons, if you will, most American whiskeys are going to be higher than 80 proof. So with Canadian whiskeys, you can find age, you can find complexity, you can find rye styles and rye forward whiskeys. There is a lot of depth and breadth along that range. But overall, you're typically looking at a slightly lower ABV and you're looking at a sweeter flavor profile. And also, because of the fact that flavoring and color can be added, some of those notes can be a little artificial. And just because a Canadian whiskey has deep color to it, doesn't mean that it's particularly old. Reading the labels and looking into transparency of the distillery is a big part of understanding that. So that's kind of an overview of Canadian whiskey. Now, again, you can get into a deeper dive. There are distilleries doing a lot of different stuff, particularly in the last few years. But overall, expect lower ABVs, sweeter flavor profiles, and understand that their blending process is a little different. Now, I don't have a bottle of American blended whiskey, but when we talk about American whiskey styles and kind of follow that same spectrum of starting lighter and sweeter and work on our way up, with American, I always start with a blended whiskey. So think a well bottle of whiskey that you might find at a bar where it says, blended bourbon, or it'll say blended whiskey. Sometimes it just says blended whiskey. Seagram's 7, I think, is an American blended whiskey. Now, in Canada, they have to be 3 years old, and they are not adding what we call neutral grain spirit, okay? They're adding individual whiskeys and blending them together made of one grain. In the United States, when they're doing a blended whiskey, those are going to be a whiskey base Typically, they're going to take some rye or some bourbon, usually bourbon, and then they're going to add what is essentially kind of like vodka or rum to that to make it go farther, give it a smoother, sweeter taste, and make it more affordable because that spirit has been unaged, so it's cheaper to put into the mix. So not only are they getting cut down with water to 80%, but it's not strictly whiskey that's in the blend. It's also going to be this sugar-based spirit typically, sometimes grain-based, but it is very similar to like a sweet vodka or rum that they blend in with the whiskey to make it go further and to give it a sweeter taste. So that would be American blended whiskey. Then we get into our other American whiskeys, the most popular being bourbon and then rye. Both of these are aged at minimum of 2 years. They're going to be aged in new American oak, so the barrels have been charred but never used for anything else. If you take a bourbon or a rye and you want to then age it in another type of bottle, that's called finishing. This is an example. It's called Hard Truth. This is one of their ryes, and it says here it's the Barrel Finish Reserve. So this one was called Maple Brulee. So these guys were taking whiskey barrels, aging maple syrup in that, then taking the barrel and recharring it to caramelize the maple syrup that had gotten into the wood, and then finishing the rye whiskey in that barrel. So we've got a bourbon, we have a rye, and we have a rye that's been finished in another type of barrel. Also within America, there's a relatively new category of wheat whiskey. Wheat whiskey is going to follow the same rules as bourbon and rye. 2 years old, made in the United States, aged in new charred oak, but at least 51% of the grain is going to be wheat. 51% of a rye whiskey or more has to be rye, and at least 51% of the mash bill of a bourbon has to be corn. There are rules on what barrel, what proof the whiskey can go into the barrel. 125 is the highest proof you can enter whiskey into a barrel to age it and call it bourbon or rye. That's another difference. Canada can make that a higher proof, and when you start to proof it out more, you lose some of the flavor, and it starts to kind of become a different category of whiskey. So the highest they can go into the barrel is 125. The lowest they can be bottled at is 80 proof. The reason you'll find whiskeys that are higher than 125 proof, as they age and water evaporates out, the alcohol is concentrated and can become stronger. With bourbon, typically going to get some oak notes, so some tannic earth notes, leather, tobacco as it gets older and more matured. Younger bourbons, I tend to get like a little bit of a woody bitterness or earthiness, but not nearly as pronounced. Typical sweet notes you'll find in bourbon would be your brown sugar, vanilla, maybe caramel. Sometimes you'll get fruit, in particular cherry or even like a cherry cola note. With rye whiskey, a lot of times you can get some of those same sweet notes, but you'll also start to get mint or dill, herbal notes. Sometimes you'll get like a pink bubblegum note that's in there. And then with your finished whiskeys, it really depends on what they finish it in. Certain type of oaks like French oak and other things can add a different finish. If you see bourbons that are called toasted, a lot of times that means they did some extra stuff to the barrel with how they char and burn it. Toasted bourbons tend to have kind of a marshmallowy note to me. Double oaked bourbons can almost start to get a little chocolatey. Double oaked ryes will start to get some of those same notes. Wheated bourbons and then wheat whiskeys, to me, tend to have some more floral and fruit flavored notes than you'll get with the rest of this lineup. Now, depending on how rye forward a whiskey is or how similar to bourbon is, there can be little difference or there can be significant giant difference. So once you kind of understand the basics, that's where tasting and trying things and just trying to find things that are similar to what you like matters. Just because you like one rye whiskey does not mean you'll like the next. It could be 100% rye, and it could be a 51% rye with a bunch of corn and stuff in it that makes it similar to a bourbon. Once you really start to dive in, you got to try to learn more about what you're sipping, but this is a great way to have a basic understanding. Another category in American whiskey that is growing in popularity is the American single malt. This has become one of my favorite styles, and my favorite distillery for this style is Westward. Now, this is their Pinot Noir cask finish. So this is going to be 100% malted barley made in America, and then they finish it in Pinot Noir cask. And I believe this one does not give you an age statement. It just says it's 100% malted barley, aged to perfection, then finished in the Pinot Noir barrels. For me, American single malts, particularly Westward, have a almost kind of mocha coffee shop nose and taste to them that I really love. They definitely come across different, and this is what I'm sipping on today, by the way, is the Westward Pinot Noir cask. I mean, this almost smells like chocolate cake with strawberries. There's a red fruit note for sure. It's sweet, but not overly sweet. It's chocolatey, but like I said, there's also that little bit of like dark chocolate or coffee that's a little bitter and keeps it from being overly sweet. You're not getting that brown sugar rich caramel vanilla sweet that you get with bourbon and rye. It's softer, kind of juicy. So good on the palate too. Coffee, fruit. It's subtle. Got a nice mouthfeel. This one's 90 proof, so not overly hot at all. I'm not going to say it evolves a ton, but the flavor profile is extremely unique and really delicious. I think Westward, I've got 4 bottles back here from Westward and plan to get more in the future. I've been blown away by everything they make. They just do some really interesting stuff. I highly recommend checking out Westward. There are other great American single malts out there. Westland is another good producer of them. You can also get Stranahan's make some great ones. Breckenridge is a brand that has some good American single malt. They're definitely out there, and it's a style that's growing in popularity. They're also starting to try to get more rules and regulations around that style and kind of tighten it up and create more of a cohesive thing. So now that we've kind of done the North American whiskeys, we're going to move over international. We're going to hit Ireland first. So we've got one that's extremely well known here, which would be Jameson. And now Jameson, Paddy's, Tullamore, these are all kind of your entry-level Irish whiskeys. These are going to be called triple distilled. And that means they're going to do 3 different distillation processes and blend them together to get you the final product. These are typically bottled at 80 proof, relatively affordable. I do think that while Jameson is the most popular and it's someone who spent a long time in the service industry, I still enjoy knocking back a shot of JMO when I'm watching the game at the bar or something. I would say, though, to sip on an entry level, the Tullamore I think is a fantastic bottle and really drinks quite above the rest of the affordable entry level Irish whiskeys. And then one of my favorite categories of Irish whiskey, of whiskey in general, is Irish single pot still. So pot still is one of the methods typically used in one of the types of stills that are used. They're typically for craft production. They're more labor intensive, single batch at a time. They do provide more flavor and nuance, but they are more expensive and more difficult to work with. Single pot still whiskeys are only made using pot still. They don't use the other stills as well in the blend like the triple distilled do. These also use 100% a mix of malted barley and unmalted barley, which makes them really unique. Redbreast 12, probably the most famous version of this, but Powers is really good. Teeling does some single pot still. Middleton. There are a handful of brands out there. It's a style that almost died and went away, and it has come back. And I personally think it's some of the best whiskey out there. It can be buttery, kind of like shortbread, slightly like pastry. Sometimes like Green Spot is another great single pot still. Green Spot's one of my favorite bottles. I get some green apple and coconut in that one where it almost turns tropical. And single pot still is hard to beat. One of the great styles, I think, to introduce yourself to whiskey with, just because it's warm and soft and it's a delicate whiskey. It's slightly sweet, but not overpowering. Just a really great style and very unique. And then we can go to Scotch. And so we'll do a video focused on Scotch and kind of deep diving. But just to give you an idea, you have your mainstream blended Scotch whiskeys. So this is going to be like your Cutty Sark, your Dewar's, your Famous Grouse, Chivas, Johnny Walker. These are all going to be a blend of grain and malt whiskeys. So some made with 100% barley and some made with other grains. They're going to be blended together from different distilleries. So it's different types of whiskey from different distilleries, blended together to give you a consistent taste. A lot of these brands don't even have their own distillery. They simply source whiskey from other distilleries and blend them together. Cutty Sark was the #1 whiskey in the US going back to like the 70s. Not nearly as big here as it used to be, but an iconic brand. Then you're going to get into the higher end of blended scotches like the Compass Box line or like this Maclean's Nose, where you're going to have blended Scotch whiskey or blended malt whiskey. With those, they're still going to be blending from different distilleries, but oftentimes like a blended malt is going to be only blended single malts. They're not going to do any of the grain. I believe this here does have a little bit of grain into it as well, but if you haven't had Maclean's Nose before, this is from the same producer that makes Ardnamurchan American. Adelphi, which is a great, Ardnamurchan American is a great kind of craft Scotch distillery that's really blown up in the last few years. This one is 46% non-chill filtered, no color added. It does have a slight peatiness to it. Comes from what they call the island region. So it's just really nice. This bottle typically runs under $30. So it's a great way to get some complexity, get a little bit of peat, get that a nice, interesting flavor profile that's kind of middle of the road without spending a ton of money. And then a couple other great blended malt whiskeys would be Naked Malt, which I featured in another video previously, and the Compass Box like Orchard House or Crimson Cask. Those are both great blended malts. So then we get into our single malts, which are going to be 100% barley whiskey made from a single distillery. So typically you can break down into a handful of regions with Scotch. Your Highland region, these are going to be some of the best Scotches, I think, to introduce bourbon drinkers to Scotch. Highland whiskeys are known for clean spirit, lighter flavor profiles, aged in ex-bourbon cask. So some of the notes you get can be a little bourbon forward. I oftentimes also get a little bit of like fudginess from Highland. A Knock 12, Arran 10, Glencadam 10 are all great examples of this style. Deanston Virgin Oak is one of my wife's favorite bottles. Really interesting bottle. Now, one of the differences that they do age some of this in new oak barrels, similar to what you would do with bourbon instead of using ex-bourbon barrels. So it definitely gives you some bourbon style notes. But Highland whiskeys, light, sometimes a little fruity, definitely can be a little like chocolatey, but they're going to be on the sweeter side. They're not peated, and they're not going to be super spicy like sherried whiskeys. They're not going to be super briny like your island whiskeys. Just very clean, consistent whiskeys. Then Speyside. Speyside is a region within Scotland, but these are really marketing terms. These are not like official regions where you have to be from somewhere to use that term. Speyside whiskeys are typically known for being aged in ex-sherry cask. Glenallachie 12, one of the most intense examples of that. You can see the color on here. This is a no color added Scotch. So all of that red hue is coming from the ex-sherry barrels that they're using. Glenallachie 12 year is 46% ABV, no color added and non-chill filtered. With sherry forward, you're going to get dark fruit like plum, sometimes even stewed or cooked fruit. If you've ever had a mincemeat pie, the dessert from England, that some of those characteristics. Spice forward, there will be some vanilla and some other sweetness, but these are definitely warmer, rounder, kind of spicy and darker flavored whiskeys. Really lovely. Some other great sherried whiskeys. The Crimson Cask from Compass Box is a great one. Bunnahabhain 12 is a great sherried whiskey I have. Bunnahabhain 12 is from the Islay region, was typically known for peated whiskeys, but that is a sherried unpeated whiskey, so it's a really interesting pour. Glenfarclas 12, a very traditional, great sherried Speyside Scotch. Speaking of Islay, when you go to the Islay region, you're typically known for their peated whiskeys, something like Ardbeg. This is the Ardbeg Anno. So this is going to be a heavily peated whiskey that is finished in sherry cask to give you some of those same fruited, spicy notes like we talk about. There is the classic Laddie from Bruichladdich is from Islay, but is unpeated. So this has some really interesting, unique characteristics, but without the smoke. Some of the other classic well-known Scots from the Islay area would be Laphroaig and Lagavulin. Again, this region is mostly known for their intense peated whiskeys, meaning the malt was smoked by burning peat moss. It can give campfire, notes, it can give barbecue meaty notes, and it can give like industrial kind of machine oil notes. Very unique style of whiskey. And then probably my favorite personal region is the Island region. A couple of my favorite whiskeys from there would be something like Isle of Raasay, which is a newer whiskey, single malt from there, or Oban 14 is one of my favorites as well. So the Island region is a little further, I believe further west than Isla, and is on the coast there. And you do get some coastal maritime notes. You'll start to taste some brine and some salt water and some other notes in there. Although these whiskeys are typically lightly peated, not nearly as smoky and peat forward as the ones from Isla. So this has been kind of a quick overview, starting at one end with our Canadian blended and going all the way over to our kind of peaty, intense Isla Scotches. Hopefully this gives you a little bit better understanding of the categories. If there are any categories you'd specifically like me to dive deeper into and give you some more information on, please leave that in the comments. I'm sure that we'll do some different style focused videos as we go down the road. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like to support us, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way you can help us out. As always, I ask that you drink responsibly, drink respectfully, but most of all, have fun doing it. Thank you for joining us today. Cheers.